All right, I think it's time to move on to our next panel here. So if you guys would kindly let us start. I know it's a lot of excitement here. All right, so my name is William Gorham, VP of Business Development and Partnering with Plenary. I have an esteemed panel here, so would like to give them the opportunity to speak, and I will just be asking questions and making sure that they have an opportunity to share their knowledge. I also have the benefit of following my boss, so I don't actually have to introduce Plenary, thankfully. He did it much more eloquently than I did. Just suffice it to say, I'm based out of our LA office here. I get the opportunity to engage with owners and partners prior to procurement, so get to have a lot of interesting conversations. And in particular, one topic that has come up over the last year or two is some of the emergent opportunities, technologies, and approaches to delivering transit. As we'll hear in a moment, we're kind of at an inflection point here. A lot of opportunity with funding, a lot of mandates to address climate change, other diversity and equity issues, while also challenges in the public space delivering some of these projects. So would like to open it up to the panel here to really discuss some of these topics from a variety of angles. So first off, because it's a short panel here and some great minds, wanted to very quickly allow folks to introduce themselves. So 30 seconds, starting with Ray.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Ray Wolf. I'm the Executive Director of the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority. I appreciate the opportunity to be here in person again, and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to speak today. My name is Hilary Norton, and I am a California Transportation Commissioner, the Chairwoman Emeritus of the California Transportation Commission, and I'm also the Executive Director of FastLink DTLA, a transportation management organization for downtown Los Angeles.
Blake Barber, Chief Technology Officer at Glydways. We develop a high-capacity, highly automated transit network system for public transit. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Brent Butzin. I'm with Kaplan, Kirsch, and Rockwell. We're a boutique national law firm focused exclusively on projects, mostly for public entities, and I'm a partner in our P3 and alternative delivery practice.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Shaun Miller with LA Metro's Office of Innovation. I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, you guys are great. All right. So starting off with you, Hilary, can you provide a little bit of context to where we are in the state with respect to transit and some of the cross-cutting issues that the agencies and public might have to deal with?
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Will. And I want to thank Ken for really meeting a moment of inflection. And as I read who all is here, if we all work together, we can really change the world. And I'm so excited about the opportunity to share those ideas today. To set the stage, CTC manages $5 to $7 billion every year in gas tax money. And we are also happy to have Governor Newsom double down on some of the things we've asked for that says this is the time that we need to go into the surplus and actually get more money in the state to apply for transportation. So far, the governor has proposed $1 billion in active transportation funds. He's proposed about $3 billion in additional transit dollars and infrastructure. And that then is to be partnered with over $40 billion that we're going to get on the natural for federal formula funds through IIJA, and $195 billion that we could be competing for, and that's what I want to talk about today, so that we can get additional funding to support all of the needs that we're talking about. And I think the key thing is that we need to take this time to look at dynamic collaboration for an ecosystem of prosperity, not just projects. And I think we have a chance, especially with the genius that's in this room, to make sure that we are doing the opposite of what has been done before, which is focus on a project, focus on what the deliverables of that project, only measure the metrics of that project, versus taking this time to say, how are we going to deliver on a huge amount of promises in the future? How can we have our highway system have tolling and transit on that highway system so that that tolling can help fund transit into the future and increase our ability to have state of good repair invest in new ways of delivering a road? How do we invest in EV conveyance and perhaps in induction charging, broadband, stormwater, all to make sure that we are not just rebuilding the road as it was, but that we're adding multi-modes, we're changing the ability to even have that roadway deliver with low GHG concrete and to do things in a new way. I also think part of why I love being at the 30,000 foot level and the 1 foot level with the TMO, we have to change the culture. And what we need to know is that in the biggest disruption to workforce travel in peacetime, we were only able to deliver 35% of people that could work from home. And the people who are working from home right now don't want to continue working from home. We have to bring our economy back. So how are we going to deliver services and a new way of increasing access to jobs for equitable access for everyone, while also rebuilding our ability to deliver those projects and invest in all of the other issues that are going to be part of delivering a full system, such as the access to new jobs, access to housing. So can we create enhanced infrastructure finance districts so that all of the investments that are coming in for the transportation are actually going to have 30 years of prosperity to invest in the other elements of delivering transit? I'm excited for all the people on this dais. I want to, of course, being on the only woman on this panel, even though the last panel had many more, I want to say that if you invest in women, if you invest in how women travel, how women meet the workforce, how you can think about as you're developing your project, how you're going to have your mom, your daughter, your partner access this system, you will change the workforce for the better. You will help us bring back our economy and therefore help our self-help counties continue to be prosperous and help us invest in a system that's really meant for all and is going to promote the cultural change that we really are going to seek, and you are all going to help us deliver. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm already hearing a lot of discussion of collaboration and changing the mindset and approach. So speaking of that, turn to you, Blake. You are with a company that's representing a new approach to transportation or transit. I'm wondering if you might describe how that works and how that might fit in with what Hilary described.
Yeah, no, thanks, Will, and this is an incredible panel to be on, so thanks to everyone on the panel. The way I view the current context in terms of technology, I'm just incredibly excited about where we are currently from a technology standpoint, and I think where we stand is really at the early stages still of something that we'll all look back on and view as having been just a major revolution in robotics and automation. And we're already seeing this, and ultimately I think we'll trace this back, when we trace it back, in no small part to the original DARPA Grand Challenges in 2004 as an incredible example of the public sector reaching out and really fostering and promoting and prompting what will have been a revolution in innovation and an entirely new form of innovation. So I think it's an incredible example, and we've seen now, going from the initial DARPA challenges in 2004 with $1 million of prize money, and the excitement that generated has now turned into over $200 billion of private investment, private capital investment in promoting innovation in autonomous vehicles and autonomous vehicle technologies. And having lived through this and been part of this, it's been this incredibly exciting thing to see. And we've now developed this toolbox of capabilities that we just simply didn't have before that allow us to solve problems that just quite simply were not solvable previously. And so we've got this new set of tools with what's been generated in the autonomous vehicle industry and revolutions in machine learning and massively parallel compute capabilities that we can now bring to bear to solve problems that we quite simply could not solve before. And we see this already leading to exciting innovations in a wide variety of fields and different domains, from obviously transportation applications, but also warehouse automation and medical applications, and a variety of agricultural applications, just a broad variety of applications. And so we see this revolution happening, and this will apply to public transit as well as these technologies apply. And there are a couple of challenges we have in public transit. One of the challenges we have is providing forms of public transit that demonstrate positive unit economics that allow us to scale those forms of public transit to provide accessibility to all the areas that we want to and need to provide accessibility. Another major challenge we have is providing a quality of service in public transit that's actively drawing people out of private personal rides and private automobiles into more sustainable forms of transit. And I believe as we take this new toolbox that we have and apply it to public transit, what we'll see is a new form of public transit that delivers on both of those challenges, that both provides positive unit economics, so we can now scale it to all the areas that we want to scale it, and that provides a quality of service that's actively drawing people out of personal rides in their private automobiles into a form of transit that is very efficient and that is sustainable both environmentally and economically. So it's just incredibly exciting time. And the core concepts and fundamental concepts here, there's nothing fundamentally new. As with many other major innovations, we've been within the industry talking about and thinking about and writing about these very efficient networks of small, personalized, shared vehicles operating on their own fixed guideways, providing low to zero wait time, zero stops, continuous flow throughout the system, direct efficient routing from any point on the network to any point on the network. We've been talking about this for a very long time, and we now have the full suite of tools that will allow us to realize this. So I think it's just an incredibly exciting time to be involved here. And of course, it takes all of us working together to make this happen. But I think there's every reason to be optimistic that as we come together, collectively foster innovation, demonstrate and signal that we're open to innovation, that we'll see really a revolution in the way that we do transit. So I think it's a very exciting time to be involved.
Yeah, no, I'm hearing the way I'd like to think about it is not competition with more traditional forms of transportation. It's adding that layer, potentially addressing some of that last last mile connectivity issue, and really filling in. So using efficiently the money that we see coming from the state and the federal levels to continue to expand the options for users and get folks out of their car as the default and only option. So we've already talked about kind of the wide context. We've talked about a specific sort of technology, diving down into that level. So, how about the agencies that are actually implementing now? Ray, I'd like to start with you and talk about some of the innovative stuff that SBCTA is thinking about now.
So, San Bernardino County has not traditionally been known in the transit circles as an agency that has really pushed the envelope, right? We've always been known as a car-centric county. But in the last decade, we have really transitioned because we've got two basic pressures that we constantly grapple with. The first is the affordability of housing in the Inland Empire, whether it's San Bernardino County or Riverside County. Quite a bit cheaper to buy a house there than it is in the coastal counties of Orange and Los Angeles. And so we're continuing to see a growing demand from the commuter sector because the job centers remain in the coastal counties. And so that's one of our primary challenges. The second is freight movement, right? Southern California is the epicenter of the national goods movement, right? And that's not changing. Just a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, we saw Gene Soroka, the executive director of the Port of Los Angeles, in the news touting the record growth that they had seen over the last quarter in volumes. And that has occurred throughout the pandemic, right? Well, those trucks, many of those trucks are destined for warehousing, logistics, and manufacturing centers in San Bernardino County. And so we've got this tremendous growth in demand from the freight sector. And most of those goods that travel through the ports of LA and Long Beach that are actually destined for markets outside of California run through San Bernardino County. So I have for years said that the ports of LA and Long Beach represent the gateway to the Asian marketplace. It's truly San Bernardino County is the gateway to the American marketplace. So those are the two challenges that we have struggled with for years. And traditional solutions simply aren't good enough, right? Because we have done that for decades. And so now we're looking at how do we as a self-help county, a county that's taxed ourselves to invest in transportation, where the priority when we went to the voters last in 2004 was transportation on the highways. It wasn't transit, right? So how do we as an agency now pivot to say, there's only so much we can do in the highway network. There's only so much concrete we can put down, and it's probably not appropriate that we continue to look at just that angle to solve our problems. How do we pivot to start to really invest in transit? So we have worked very closely with Metrolink to extend the Metrolink system east to the University of Redlands. That project will open up for revenue service this fall. But part of that, as I was coming on board to this agency a decade ago, part of it was going through the environmental process. Our plan as an agency had been to buy decommissioned Metrolink trains and use those for the service. Well, the community, rightfully so, in the environmental engagement said, that's not, why should we accept something that is no longer good enough for the rest of the Metrolink system? So we came back and we started looking at what solutions are out there. And we landed on something similar to the Sprinter system that runs in North County, San Diego, right, to connect Escondido to Oceanside. That system operates with what I call a diesel bus on rails, right? It's a direct drive diesel with transmissions in it and all that. The new generation of the multiple unit vehicle actually has a power pack that has diesel generators that generate electricity that feed electric traction motors. So it's exactly the same configuration as light rail or subway type vehicles, except that it has onboard power generation, so you don't need the infrastructure of a third rail or an overhead catenary. But when we were looking at the solution, I asked my staff, can't we do better, right? So this vehicle, it would seem, in a very simplistic form, you can easily pull the power source out and replace it with a zero-emission power source. Because, let's face it, Elon Musk has changed the conversation, at least in the passenger vehicle space, with his advancements on battery technology, right? So initially, we looked at battery solutions, but we wanted to make sure the vehicle could actually run all throughout the Metrolink system, not just the 9-mile extension that we were opening. And so in doing that, we landed on a hybrid solution where hydrogen fuel source or hydrogen fuel cells will provide that primary source, but there's also significant grade variations throughout Southern California in the Metrolink system. And so we couldn't ignore the potential for regenerative braking energy, and so that's where we have the hybrid focuses. We also have battery packs in there. So I'm proud to say that we are prototyping the first self-contained zero-emission passenger rail vehicle in North America and quite possibly in the Western Hemisphere. I haven't paid attention to what's going on in South America lately, but this is really exciting. And just so you know, the vehicle is actually going to be realized. It will be unveiled in September at InnoTrans in Berlin, assuming that world events don't change significantly. So really exciting, and we'll have it here for testing in about a year, little over a year in San Bernardino County. So that's the first sort of solution that we've tried to bring to bear on the innovative side. But we're also looking at a partnership with Brightline West, which is a high-speed rail private entity that operates high-speed trains on the east coast of Florida. They bought the rights to the high-speed rail connection from Southern California to Las Vegas, right? And so we're partnering with them to connect down to the Metrolink system in Rancho Cucamonga. And then the last thing I'll mention is we're trying to figure out how to connect our Metrolink system at the Rancho Cucamonga station to Ontario International Airport, because it's really important. Ontario is not as large as my friends at LAX, but it's one of the fastest growing airports in the country right now. And that's not going to change because, again, the population is moving in that direction. And so you need access to airport properties out in that area, and Ontario is definitely taking advantage of that. So we want to make sure that before it becomes a real challenge, that we've got a transit connection to that airport. And in fact, we're trying to target the 2028 Olympics as the timeline to make that happen. Met with Glydways. I want to thank Blake and the team there at Glydways. Really innovative, out-of-the-box thinking to help to change the conversation of how we introduce transit. So really exciting things going on, and just a great time to be in this industry.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Shaun, same question to you. How is LA Metro looking at some of these alternative approaches, technologies, delivery models?
Yeah, great question. Is this working well? Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I think, we're certainly focused on, delivering the really ambitious plan of Measure M and figuring out how we can best deliver these projects. And, one of the things that our office used very shortly around the time that Measure M was passed was the previous CEO had unveiled the unsolicited proposals policy to help bring in ideas from the private sector to figure out how we can best deliver these, major corridor transit projects. And so we've been engaged in that work for several years now, and I think it's been a really effective tool to help bring in new and innovative ways to look at how we deliver those projects. But not only that, I think a lot of the work also needs to be done internally with Metro and bringing people along. And I think in our department, we see ourselves kind of as facilitators to help with that process and ensure that we bring as many people into the conversation as early as possible on these projects. So making sure that the handover from planning to program management to operations is, one that is smooth and that the life cycle of the project is considered when we're doing that work. But we've had several proposals that came in for projects like Sepulveda and West Santa Ana Branch. We're also looking at taking the concepts that came through for those types of proposals for those major transit lines and trying to press those forward to see how we can also deliver other ambitious goals like the zero emission bus program, or thinking about ways that maybe delivery models like that could inform maybe state of good repair as well for instance other metro assets. So that's one way that we're, I think, trying to come to terms with both how we deliver the projects that are already on our plate, but also thinking forward as we, are met with other board directives or other opportunities to improve connectivity across the region.
Great, thanks. So Brent, to you, when looking at the traditional way of delivering projects, what might have to change or how might agencies might need to think differently about how they approach some of these technologies and contracting structures, and vice versa? What private sector kind of considerations when coming to address public agencies?
Sure, thanks. And I've heard folks talk about an inflection point. I've heard folks talk about a revolution, and it probably goes without saying that those are the sorts of words that make lawyers a little uncomfortable. And I think that really goes to the challenges in implementing some of these emerging transit technologies. Really in two buckets. One, the number of unknowns we have to deal with. And two, really the stickiness of our legal requirements. I think it goes without saying that California is not the least regulated place where you ever have to work. But by and large, we know how to build a road. We know how to build a rail system. But when we're talking about emerging technologies, AVs, microtransit projects, we're putting thought into areas where we normally don't have to think about things. And then on top of that, the nature of these technologies really does lend itself to earlier and more robust private sector involvement, the collaborative models that other folks have been talking about. But California's, notwithstanding a few high-profile projects, most of California is not really known as a place where alternative delivery in P3 is common or easy to do. So it puts us in an interesting position of, we know that AVs alone won't solve the problems that we're trying to solve, right? California's put a lot of focus on what are we going to do about autonomous vehicles, but it's mostly been personal autonomous vehicles. What we're talking about here is implementing those sorts of technologies as transit. Okay, well, who are we talking about here? The DMV is regulating AVs. Is it the CPUC? Yeah, maybe, but a lot of agencies, transit agencies around California, kind of self-certify. Well, what does that mean for a transit operator to self-certify that a system is safe on a new technology that, there's perfect, great test tracks and other things, but, not in revenue service. So what do you do with that? And I think it goes without saying that Tesla is not going to give you the keys to the castle and tell you how their software works either. So there's a little bit of guesswork involved. And I think that's really our biggest challenge, plus just knowing where it's going. I mean, right now, it's a bit of the Wild West out there, even for new transit. It reminds me of early Uber, right? Where kind of anything goes until the regulators catch up. And I think that's still the case here. Basic questions. Does the ADA apply? Well, of course it does. Well, what does that look like in a fully autonomous system where you don't have an operator to assist? We don't really know. Does Buy America apply? Well, of course it does. Well, that's not possible for some of the alternative technologies to be, to meet those requirements. So can you get a waiver? Yeah, probably. So there's a bit of a leap of faith going on all over the place, and creativity is absolutely necessary to get these things off the ground, because if you're just reading the letter of the law, it's really easy to get to know when you're trying to make these projects work.
Yeah, thank you. And so to that point, go for it, Hilary, please.
I just really wanted to double down on that, because the CTC right now is spending a lot of time in the guidelines process just trying to work through some of these issues. And please be present in these guidelines conversations. Innovation doesn't just happen. Innovation has to be funded. And so having these conversations at the organization level is really important. Thinking about how do we fund mobility hubs? Where does that fit in any of our programs? And yet that is a huge prosperity and cultural change and equity opportunity. How do we make sure that we are linking in the BRTs and moving to EVs and making sure that they're knitting together all of these organizations and these cities? I think that one of the things I'm very happy about is that we have just tonight at the Transportation Committee in the state, Maria Elena DeRosso, someone who is a labor leader from decades back. She is doing a bill to have a joint powers authority to deliver zero emission transit with a nonprofit partner. You have legislators that are trying to get it right and to do new things and to be good regulators and spur innovation. Please make sure you look at SB 1226 and help invest in it and spend time with it. You are also going to be educating the legislators and the regulators, because we're trying to get it right. And so I really want to just +1 on everything you're saying, and just to make sure that we're creating that equity, environment, access, and choice. People want to get it right, and let's make sure we're educating as to what you need so that we can have the programs and the regulations respond to everything you envision are going to be the challenges.
And I would just briefly add on that, when you are participating in some of these discussions, particularly funding discussions, talk to some of the folks who are trying these projects out around the state. Mm-hmm. Talk to Ray, talk to the folks up in Contra Costa County, and try and understand what it is that's tying your hands, or you're moving ahead with a blindfold on, because a lot of these restrictions that I'm talking about are tied to funding sources, are tied to color of money. And we're in a new world where, if we're being honest, we don't know fully how to do ridership projections or revenue projections on these new technologies and what it looks like 20 years from now. So how do you structure within these existing constraints without knowing where necessarily the money is going to come from?
Yeah, and I would echo that as well. When we've struggled with this, the East Contra Costa example is a great example where P3 sort of broad public-private partnership authority doesn't exist in the state, and we would obviously like to see that as a tool for public agencies to utilize, but that hasn't been provided to date, and so it's about helping folks understand it's not mandating it, it's allowing public agencies to make that choice on what best fits their delivery model and technology solution. So. Great segue or opportunity to talk a little bit more about specific projects. Ray, it'd be great if you could be a little bit more detailed on, what is that airport connector project looking at, because it really is an innovative approach to transit and connectivity.
There it is. All right. Yeah. So since before I started in this agency, we were looking at surface alternatives to connect the airport to the Metrolink system, because we knew that was going to be important long term for the traffic movement and people movement, really, in and out of that airport property. But the surface alternatives were untenable when it comes to financing. So in 2017 dollars, we were looking at $1.5 billion to build a surface rail connection, whether it was extending a light rail or whether it was connecting a Metrolink system in there. And a lot of that is driven by the fact that the environment that we would be traversing is already built up. There's lots of homes, there's lots of industry from where we're trying to go to get to the airport property. And so just the right-of-way acquisition alone was really significant. So then we had an opportunity to really sort of rethink things, look outside of the box with an unsolicited proposal from the boring company that suggested that we look underground, right? And as an engineer, I always, I'm nervous about doing things like that because of the seismic concerns that we have here in California, particularly in the LA basin. But we dug into it and really looked at the problem and realized that tunneling technology is changing from what it traditionally has been. There still are tunnel boring machines that are used by companies. In fact, the boring company, that's really what they do, but they've spent a lot of time to try to optimize their systems to make sure that they can cut the costs. And they've really disrupted the industry. In the end, we're moving forward. We're working on the environmental clearance for the project right now. That work will be done at the end of next fall, so just about 1.5 years from now. And we're going back to our board here in July to talk about what's next in the procurement. So looking at different procurement alternatives. And I think the last panel really nailed it when they said, you've got to have the suite of tools available, but they don't always match with specific projects. So you really need to delve into what's the right procurement for what you're trying to accomplish, what are your goals, and how do you get there? And so we're working through that process right now. We're also looking at, what type of connection are we trying to make? Now, the airport property is trying to figure out how it's going to look in the future, right? Right now, there are 2 terminals that are oriented 90 degrees out of whack. So the terminals, the long face of the terminals faces the parking lots, right? But you really want those oriented 90 degrees the other way so that you have more gate space, right? The planes can pull up on both sides. So they may scrap what's out there today at some point and rethink it, right? They're trying to figure out, how they want to provide security. Do they want to have a centralized facility, and once you pass through security, then you're in a secure environment, or are they going to continue to provide security at the various terminals? And so all of that leads us to believe that a rail system is not the appropriate one because it would be too costly for us to rebuild that once they figure out what they want to do. So a rubber-tired solution is really the solution we're looking at. Then you say, okay, do I want a bus that can haul 20 people, a shuttle-type vehicle that can haul 20 people, or do I want something more in the micro-transit environment? The beauty of doing a tunnel is we can create a completely closed environment. And that allows us to use autonomous technology to our advantage, right? And Hilary talked about long-term sustainability. That's what we're trying to think about. Again, as I mentioned in my previous comments, we're an agency that does not have a lot of money focused on transit. And so we're trying to figure out how to do things differently in a very sort of financially constrained environment, much more so than perhaps many other agencies here in Southern California. And so my goal is to actually move forward with a procurement in less than 1 year to push this project forward. Now, I'm going to need some money, Hilary, but to push this project forward to make this connection before the 2028 Olympics. Because let's face it, we're going to need to have as many access points in and out of Southern California as possible, and Ontario International Airport is going to be a key player in that conversation. So we've got to make the transit connection before that event.
Great. I will open up for questions if folks have them. Otherwise, I can keep asking questions to the panelists. So feel free to raise your hand if you guys have issues to address. But kind of following on where we started the conversation a little bit, so collaboration, I think, is sort of the theme of the topic here. Want to, I guess, explore a little bit further, maybe with Shaun first, and can go from there about, how do you actually break down some of the institutional barriers to approaching collaboration? How do you deal with some of the funding collaboration issues? How do you deal with, multi-stakeholder collaboration issues? Each of you will probably have your own perspective on it, but curious if you can start on, how do you fundamentally break those down to approach things differently?
Yeah, great question. And I guess I want to point back to unsolicited proposals as being a really effective tool to start that conversation, basically with the private sector and Metro, because often, an agency like Metro can be like a black box for a company that wants to do business with us. But that said, there's a lot of internal collaborative work that must be done. And I think at the end of the day, there's very little that the private sector or external parties can really bring into the agency that will drive decisions effectively. That work has to be done internally. It has to be done with Metro taking an honest look at the alternatives in front of it, and be willing to consider that we don't have total control in every scenario, or maybe there are some scenarios in which there are others that are sort of better suited to take on certain risks, but also just to be honest with whether or not we can accomplish what we need to set out to accomplish with Measure M, for instance, with the resources that we have available to us. And I think that what we have learned is that there are ways for our private partners to bring, information that can bear on decisions, but we've got to be willing to be honest with ourselves and work toward a decision that's best for that project based on all of the parameters that are in front of us.
Blake, maybe turn to you to
yeah, no, I would love to comment on that same topic, which is I mentioned when talking about funding in the autonomous vehicle and autonomous vehicle technology space, you can really trace the roots of this back to that initial DARPA Grand Challenge scenario, where a relatively small public outlay created this environment where we've now attracted over $200 billion worth of funding into that space. So I think something that is key, and it takes all of us working together to drive this innovation. I think something that we all can do, and we'll all do it in different ways, but is to just very proactively and very visibly signal that we are open to innovation, that we are willing to foster innovation, that we're willing to fund innovation, right? To attract in, because there's capital that we can bring to bear on this problem outside of the routine sources of capital. And if we all are willing to signal that, look, we're open for innovation, we will innovate, we will apply innovative technologies. And you can look at the work that Ray's doing with SBCTA or East Contra Costa County, or we can talk about the work that's being done in San Jose with the airport connector. But I think there are a number of these different projects where we see this happening and that signaling happening. Hey, we're open to innovation here. We want to provide more accessibility. We want to provide a higher quality of service, and we'd like to attract in capital to make that happen.
Great. So I guess as we're kind of starting to wrap up the panel here, as we're looking ahead, what is for each of you, what is the most exciting aspect of how, again, an inflection point, revolution, whatever scares Brent, as we look ahead, what does kind of get you guys excited about how things are changing? Starting to go down the line, if you don't mind.
So I would just say, for me, it's really exciting to see the transformation that we're creating in our community. And I really, truly believe that we're taking the right steps to pave the way for the future. And it's exciting to me that we're not just looking at how do we solve today's mobility challenges with yesterday's solution suite. We're looking at how do we solve today's transportation challenges with an eye towards tomorrow, and how do we bring that to bear? It's really exciting. It's really exciting.
Right.
I'm excited about new multimodal networks and the ways that we can use mobility hubs and others to have that frictionless, seamless opportunities to switch modes and to give ourselves that freedom again instead of the constraints that we feel in our car. We're going to deliver that, and I think the ability to think ahead to deliver those multi-benefits in the future is something that I think we can make sure that we're taking this generational moment and investing for a generation and not just for a couple of projects right now.
Yeah, so I'm obviously very excited about this toolbox of technology that we have to apply to this problem. I think it leads to some very, very positive benefits kind of across the board. But perhaps more exciting than that, if anything is more exciting than that to me, is what we already see happening in terms of partnering and collaborating within the entire ecosystem to realize the benefits of these technologies across these various projects. And we're obviously interested in collaborating broadly, kind of across the state, across the country, and ultimately the world, right, to realize the benefits that this technology can bring to bear.
For me, it's really about getting to solve the puzzle. These are interesting projects and getting to work with really interesting people who want to sort of be on the cutting edge of these things. It's a different experience. Like, you're probably used to working in a startup environment, but yeah, I mean, we're really figuring this out as we go, and it does give some people the shivers, but it's also a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I have 3 seconds, 2, 1. My time is up, sorry. No, I'm excited about a lot of things. I think at Metro, I'm really excited about micro. So I think Julie was up here saying, take it, it's great. It's a fantastic way, I think, to connect with the major corridors. And I'm excited about, the new technology that can help us to deliver on those massive, really expensive projects, especially at a time when we are severely constrained. Those are some of the things that excite me.
Great. Well, can everyone give a round of applause to our panelists? Thank you very much.